On today's Locked On NHL, the NHL's national TV schedule was announced. And what are the pros and cons of each of these broadcasts versus your local broadcasts? Plus, the latest NHL news and the Professional Women's Hockey League is here.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome to Locked On NHL for Friday, September 1st. Cannot believe it's September already, but excited. Hockey's around the corner. I am Rachel Donner from Locked On Flyers. I'm here with Gil Martin of Locked On Islanders. Thanks for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. You can subscribe or follow us for free on YouTube or on SiriusXM. Anywhere you listen to podcasts, subscribe to get our latest episode as soon as it's available here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. How we doing this September morning, Gil?
Hard to fathom the September part, but yeah, no, doing well. And what are we, about 2.5 weeks from training camp for most NHL teams? It's this off season flew by. I mean, you blink and hockey is back, and that's not a bad thing at all.
Not a bad thing at all. I think, there's still some outstanding players and free agents and stuff out there to resolve before the season starts. And I think it being September 1st, you start to worry maybe about some of those remaining free agents that need to be signed, some RFAs out there. I know for my Flyers, we're waiting on Morgan Frost. It's a little stressful. But there's a couple free agents out there league-wide that are still an issue. Phil Kessel is still a free agent. Elliot Friedman has said that Kessel is willing to end his Ironman streak in order to get signed.
Yeah, I think he sort of has to put that out there. Doesn't look like he's going back to Vegas. They just don't have any cap room left. I mean, how do you view Kessel? I mean, he's almost 36, played last year on a one-year deal worth $1.5 million that he signed pretty much around now, like close to the start of training camp. Do you think he could still help the right team at this stage in his career?
I don't know, because his upside is like the window is shrinking about what his upside is, right? And so I feel like it's going to be a tough road for him. I wonder if he gets a PTO.
Yeah, and I wonder if he would take a PTO if that's all that's offered to him. I mean, I could see him. I mean, he only averaged a little more than 12 minutes of ice time a game last year, which was the lowest number of his career. Is he capable of giving you more than that, or is he sort of a power play specialist, fourth line kind of a guy at this stage of his career?
I mean, I think so. And I think it's good that he's willing to end the Ironman streak because, as I know very well, that can be a detriment to your team. And so I don't know. We'll see, but I certainly hope he finds a home for one more year, so at least he gets a proper send off.
Yeah, you don't want him to just have to retire because nobody wanted to sign him. That's just not the way you want to see the Iron Man go out, and there's certainly irony there if that is indeed how the streak ends and how his career ends. But look, he has had a great career, and if he wants to play one more year, I think at some point this season, please, but Lou Lamoriello, don't add another 30 something player to the lineup and sign him to a 3-year deal. Please don't do that. But all Islanders jokes aside, I think Kessel could help somebody at some point this season. It'll be interesting to see what team makes him an offer, if any.
Yeah. In other news, Patrick Kane is skating again, so that's good news for him personally. Still a free agent. You have to wonder if he'll even like get a contract or something preseason. It'll depend on the timing of his return, or if he's like a late season addition, and how does that even happen?
Yeah, I mean, basically, the timetable for his return, which was originally supposed to be 4 to 6 months, and he had the surgery on June 1st. So you're talking about the beginning of October being 4 months, and then the beginning of December being 6 months. If that's the case, do you wait until you get a better idea of when he'll be ready, or do you try to lock him up now with the hope of beating other teams to the punch?
Yeah, and but like, is that to your advantage? Like, is there a beating other teams to the punch when it comes to
Right.
Patrick Kane and his skill set right now? So, I think that is another interesting thing to keep an eye on this remaining off season, the next few weeks, to see if he gets a role somewhere around the NHL. In the meantime, the NHL put out a supporting statement for the new Women's Pro League. I know we usually do our women's hockey spotlight every other week. We had one last week. We will have one next week with Erica Ayala to dig into all the details about the new PWHL, but had to mention it because it is a big deal that the NHL put out a supporting statement on launch day for the league this week. Of course, we got the announcement that there's going to be 6 teams in the league in Boston, New York, Minnesota, Toronto, Montreal, and Ottawa. Free agency for this league starts today. The GMs were announced today. We got a draft order today. So, so much happening in such a short period of time for a league that's supposed to start in January. We don't have rinks yet. But we got with the draft order, they're going to do the draft in a snake order, kind of like fantasy hockey does. And so Minnesota will have the first overall pick, followed by Toronto, Boston, New York, Ottawa, and then Montreal will have the last pick in the first round, but the first pick in the second round, and so forth. So given that free agency starts today, the way this league is structured, in the open free agency period, each team can sign 3 players, and then everybody else is going to be drafted into the league. So you get to cherry pick a few top players around. You have to think Hillary Knight, Kendall Coyne Schofield, Marie-Philippe Poulin are going to be amongst those signed in this early stage, but we'll see.
Yeah, no, it's exciting time now with this new league starting up, and I am glad that this is all coming together, and hopefully it goes very well. And it's pretty exciting that 4 of the 6 GMs are women, which I think gives a lot of opportunities. And I'm looking forward to seeing the league get on the ice in January, and I'm sure Erica will have a lot of information for us next week because so much is happening right now in the world of women's hockey.
Absolutely. So stay tuned for that. We'll have so much more next week to wrap up the first week of free agency for them. In the meantime, the NHL put out their national broadcast schedule, announced by ESPN as well as NHL on TNT. And there's some interesting differences from last season, as well as how the opening of the season is going to go. And we will talk about all of that coming up next.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready for the NFL season with incredible offers from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Plus, all customers who bet $5 will get $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. That means that you could watch your favorite team even if they're out of market anytime. So now is the best time to join FanDuel. The app is easy to use. You can be on bet on everything from point spreads to player props and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/locked on and kick off the NFL season with an offer you won't want to miss. That's FanDuel.com/locked on. FanDuel.com/locked on. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
We got our more detailed national TV schedule for the NHL with a full rundown from ESPN and TNT. ESPN has opening night with a triple header. I think the marquee game for them is the 8 p.m. game between Chicago and Pittsburgh. Both ESPN and TNT have elected to have Connor Bedard in their premiere nights with ESPN on October 10th and TNT on October 11th. Very interesting that the Blackhawks are getting a lot of extra national TV time, as you know, well they should with a guy like Bedard on their team. ESPN is also going to show Nashville versus Tampa before the Blackhawks Pens game, and then afterwards it'll be Seattle versus the Stanley Cup champion Vegas Golden Knights. So that's a pretty solid opening night for ESPN there.
Yeah, I love that lineup. I mean, Nashville has the new GM, a new coach, Tampa Bay trying to bounce back. Certainly, Connor Bedard's debut makes for a big deal, and going against Sidney Crosby only adds a little bit more to it. And then, the Kraken, one of the surprise teams of a year ago, going up against the defending Stanley Cup champions. That is one heck of a triple header to start the season off.
And for the rest of the season, ESPN definitely, as was the case last year, has the majority of the national TV games. They have the All Star weekend coverage. They have the Stadium Series coverage, the outdoor weekend that both of our teams are
Yeah.
participating in. So we have that back to back with the Rangers versus the Islanders and the Flyers versus the Devils at MetLife Stadium. That'll be on ESPN. And then the Stanley Cup final will be on ESPN as well. So pretty solid and stacked lineup for ESPN.
Yeah, they are, they've got a full schedule. And, some of those games, like the Stadium Series, will be on ABC, the ABC Sports is run by ESPN. So you will have some of it on broadcast television. But, between ESPN and ESPN Plus, if you get the right package there, you will be able to watch a lot of hockey this season.
Yeah, we're going to get into that plus part of the
Yeah.
conversation, though. Here, I want to talk a little bit about what TNT has to offer. A little bit of news. As I well know, Keith Jones is no longer on the broadcast crew because he is the president of hockey ops for the Philadelphia Flyers now. So, another former Flyer, Brian Boucher, is going to take his place as the between the benches guy for TNT, rejoining Kenny Albert and Eddie Olczyk from their old NBC days. So they're used to working together. I love Brian Boucher. I think he and Henrik Lundqvist too, although he's newer at it, so it's going to take him a little bit more time to be 100% there. But I love goaltenders who are analysts because they've spent all this time watching the game develop in front of them and have just a unique perspective to the game that I really think benefits the analysts panels and broadcast teams.
No doubt. And look, a goalie has to view things a little bit differently than a skater does. And I think that perspective really adds something. And let's also face it, goalies are a little different, as personalities. The idea of accepting the job of getting your body in between a goal and a frozen piece of rubber coming at you at 100 miles an hour requires a certain mindset, okay, that not everybody has. But Boucher, one of the nicest guys you ever want to meet. I was lucky enough to speak to him in the press box at a few games shortly after he retired. And he is so easy to talk to, so friendly, and just so knowledgeable about the game. You could talk hockey with him all night and, just enjoy the conversation. So I'm glad to see him replacing Jonesy, who's also a really good guy to talk hockey with. And I think Boucher will be an excellent addition for TNT.
I think so as well. They are night 2 of the NHL, and they don't have a triple header, they have a double header, but still pretty good. Unfortunately for Chicago, they've got the second half of a back-to-back that night against the Boston Bruins, who will be very much changed this season. And then the second half of their opening night back-to-back is the Kings versus the Avs, which should be another really good game.
Yeah, I like that matchup as well, and a very solid doubleheader on October 11th, and a lot of Wednesday nights for TNT this season.
Yeah, and they also will be hosting the Winter Classic. So that is like their big event that they will have in addition to their Wednesday night shows. And then they'll have Sunday games once the NFL season is over. So a pretty similar balance to last season in terms of ESPN versus TNT. Uh, do you have a favorite? Can I ask you that? Are you willing to say?
Uh, a favorite national broadcast, or
Yeah, ESPN versus TNT.
I would give a slight edge to TNT at this point, but you know, it's interesting because a lot of my viewers and listeners to Locked On Islanders, they prefer the local broadcast to the national broadcast. Everybody loves their hometown announcers for whatever it's worth. So it's I would give a slight edge to TNT. I think they just handle their broadcast a little bit better, but there are some things about their broadcast that haven't shown a lot of love for my team. I'll put it that way. So
Yeah, it's always, hard to say, whether there's bias there or not, but I do think the TNT broadcast has shown a little bit more creativity and, trying to switch things up a little bit with how they do things. I do think overall the panel format is kind of stale, and so I see what, you know, TNT is trying to do there with making it more, they get up, they do things. The way that they explain strategies, I think, is pretty good. I think both broadcasts could use a little bit more analytical discussion and just about how you fuse together, numbers, analytics versus the eye test. And I think, move that conversation a little bit forward. But yeah, I think it's just tough to put together a national TV broadcast, and I think that's to your point, that's why a lot of people like the broadcast from their local crews a lot better because there's more familiarity. Because sometimes you watch these national broadcasts and they say something about your team or what's going on with an individual player, and you're like, "That is not true, sir." You know?
yeah. That may have been true a year ago, but it doesn't work now. Or, maybe you didn't watch the last game in its entirety. Yeah. And I guess it's also a matter of perspective, because when you're watching the local broadcast, these are people who watch nearly every game, if not every game of your team. And even if they're not homers per se, they are looking at the game from the perspective of the team that you're rooting for. And then even if the national broadcasters are more neutral, if you're used to seeing things from the perspective of people who share your team's viewpoint, it's going to seem biased against your team, even if they're neutral. So it is not always easy for fans to adjust from that perspective of a broadcaster who watches your team all the time to a broadcaster who's covering the entire league, or maybe who is used to covering a different team all the time and is now covering your team.
Yeah, I think it's real tough. I think that, teams that are very good and have a lot of national broadcasts, it is a challenge because you don't get to see your local crew as much either. And it's like this weird contradictory situation where your team is good, which is great, but then they're on national TV more. So you have to deal with, subscriptions and blackouts and all of that sort of stuff in order to see your team as much as you want. But there's so much more to talk about related to this, and we are going to do that coming up next. So I talked at the very end of the last segment about the blackout conversation, or mentioned it briefly. And this is, of course, my annual opportunity to complain about blackouts because I have to take it. I absolutely have to take it as a person who covers the Philadelphia Flyers but lives in the New York metro area. Makes it very difficult because if you live in New York City, which a lot of transplants from around the country and North America live in New York City, and when your team that where you're from plays, you are blacked out for 3 NHL teams here: the Devils, the Islanders, and the Rangers. You're forced to subscribe to something that carries MSG networks to see your teams, and especially being from somewhere that has a Metro Division rivalry, that's a lot of games. You
Yeah.
add up all the games that the Flyers play against the Devils, Islanders, and Rangers, that's a lot of blacked out games on the ESPN Plus program that they have, which I have to subscribe to watch a significant portion of the games. Then I have to subscribe to 2 more things to get all the national games, and then I have to subscribe to something that has MSG, and the options for that are very slim. And I just feel like there's a breaking point here with this blackout situation because so many people live in different places from where their team plays, and the blackouts can get ridiculous. And I will bring this up every time. When I lived in Utah and I got blacked out for Colorado and Arizona games, both of which are more than a 7-hour drive away from where I resided. Ludicrous, absolutely ludicrous. But what's your solution here for this blackout situation?
Yeah, it's frustrating, and to me, the solution should be that you should be able to get one package that covers all of the NHL games. I mean, NHL Center Ice used to be okay. You've got the package; you can watch anything. And I just wish that they would go back to something like that. It's frustrating as a fan to have to get multiple different subscriptions in order to watch all of the games of one team that you want to watch, and then have some of them blacked out anyway because of where you live. There's got to be a workaround. And you hate to even bring this up, but what that does is it encourages people to go stream it illegally and sort of under the hey, do you have a link? So many times on Twitter you see people trying to find a link for a game that's on ESPN Plus or TNT that they're blacked out for. That doesn't benefit the NHL. That doesn't benefit the broadcast companies either, because nobody's paying, and the fans are frustrated and desperate at the last minute to try to find a feed. So there's got to be a workaround where you can purchase one package that will get you all of the league's games. And I wish they just went back to something like that.
Yeah, I think there's got to be a way, at least even if the cost is more for the viewer and the fan. Like, I'm willing to pay a little bit more money than I'm paying for an individual package like the ESPN Plus package, which is ostensibly gets you all the games, right? Except for the blacked out ones right now. But all of the games are available technically on
Theoretically,
their
yes.
yeah, theoretically. Like, make me pay a little bit more for that and then have them do the accounting on the back end and get the money to where it needs to go so that everybody gets their money. All the networks get their money, the league gets their money, but don't put it on the fans like to have to siphon off different amounts of money, and it adds up to something that's honestly unaffordable for a lot of people. I think there's a happy medium here with increasing the overall package cost a little bit in order to make it easier and more centralized for the fan.
Yeah, I mean, and again, from a fan's perspective, if I'm paying all that money for my subscription, I want to get the games I want to get, and it just adds up really quickly. There is sort of a sweet spot where this can be a win-win-win for the league, the fans, and the broadcast companies. Finding that sweet spot is really the responsibility of the league, and I hope they will find a way to do it.
Yeah, I think so too. I think the league really, there is a breaking point here with all of this, and it can't just be me here. It
No,
cannot just
it's
be
not.
me
It's
who's
not.
frustrated. And I think that it is long overdue. And I'm hoping that maybe there's a way to weave this into the next CBA negotiation to figure out a different way to organize the media rights funds in terms of, the revenue sharing and how all of that works, to like, and if the players could be our advocates in a
Yeah.
way, as part of this, to work with the league in order to make it easier for fans to get to see all the games. And I think exposure is something this league needs, and anything the league can do to make it easier for fans to be able to see their team in a centralized way, whether it's streaming or whether it's broadcast. I do understand there's some people that still watch their games on TV, and so you want to have that available for people that aren't 100% streaming. But as somebody who has to subscribe to YouTube TV and Fubo in order to get all of the networks required, that is a hefty price to pay month to month on top of my internet in order to be able to watch all these games.
Right, and on top of ESPN Plus. So it
Hmm.
really does start to add up when you do it that way. And you just want to be fair to the fans. And you mentioned maybe the players could be the advocate for the fans at the next CBA negotiations. The fans are not going to be represented directly, which is
No.
unfortunate. So you got to hope that they can find that happy medium. And NHLPA, if you're listening, help. So
Yes.
please.
Seriously. Seriously. As far as the national broadcasts go, like you were talking about the local versus the national, I like the local broadcasts, and I actually really like on ESPN Plus the ability to sample other local broadcasts. And
Yes.
there are other local broadcasts I enjoy tremendously. I love the Kraken broadcast. I really like the Dallas Stars broadcast a lot, so give them a shout out. Unfortunately, Gil, I'm going to say I do not enjoy any of the New York area local broadcasts very
Oh,
well. I will say the Islanders in studio um, panel, great. Love them. It's the people calling the game that I could do without. But since I
I
have
got
to
to
watch
plug Butch and Brandon. They're good. They're good. But
a
if you're not an Islander fan, maybe I can understand it. But yeah,
yeah, yeah. But I do think, I do like that the national feeds like that, or the ESPN Plus, allows you to sample local broadcasts from around the NHL.
yeah, I like that as well. And when I used to have the NHL Center Ice package, I always enjoyed watching the different local broadcasts and getting a flavor for how they are and what they do. But that is definitely a perk, but it does take a little adjustment. Again, if you're used to your hometown announcers, it's a little different when somebody else is calling those games.
Absolutely. All right, that'll do it for today's show. We, of course, will be back next week. We'll have that women's hockey spotlight and talk about everything else that happened over the course of the week in the NHL. Gil will be back on Monday, spotlighting local hosts from around the league with the biggest stories for their teams. Have a great weekend, everybody.